Lovely.
Okay, and in just a moment, I will introduce you. And yeah, I'm going to pause the recording, zoom the recording. Okay, so it is 1 minute after one uh, Eastern, so we can go ahead and get started. I would like to introduce Donna Jennings, Dr. Donna Jennings. You have been a sex therapist for how many years?
Well, I've been in the sex field for 50, but sex therapy, I'd have to go and count that up.
Okay. All right. Well, you said that you have an introduction in your slide, so I will just let you take over. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Let me make sure you can see the screen. Yes?
Yes, we can see the screen.
And let me start it from the beginning and move my little stop share button because it's right in my vision sight. There we go. Well, hello, everyone. If you are here for When Sex Has Something to Say, you are in the right place. I am Dr. Donna Jennings, a retired sex therapist. And as I just said, 50 years in the sexuality field. I'm Dr. J in the writing world. I have written a children's sexuality primer, two nonfiction sexuality books, three romance novels, and I'm included in 10 erotica anthologies and numerous online platforms. I'm the former editor for Rosie, a sexual wellness platform for women. And this is kind of where my science background and my writing career merged to make some really interesting things. I want you to be aware, as writers, that students in my college classrooms would tell me that it was romance books that taught them about sex. So you're a teacher, whether you know that or not, or expected to be that or not. And the cool thing to know from a research standpoint is that reading sexy, spicy, fun scenes is non-chemical prescription that produces arousal, desire, lubrication, and orgasm. So I want you to know that's scientifically based. So I wanted to give you that to start with. I'm excited to share my writing process with you today because sex always has something to say. We're going to start with my story, Rein Her In, as the anchor to discuss the sexuality scene construction, and then the PIMS balance, sexual and emotional arc, and relationship placement in story structure. So today, I am giving you permission to delve deeply into sex so you can give your characters permission to do that. Paula, I know I won't be able to see the chat while I'm doing the PowerPoints. If there's anything that comes up, just feel free to let me know in the process and we'll deal with that there.
I
Hopefully,
will sure do that.
hopefully everyone has read the story and done the checklist. So if they don't have it, you can pop it into the chat for them to at least have access to it while we're working right now. And with that, I'm going to get started. So holistic sexuality. It's one of those things that you probably haven't heard about because it's not discussed in many places, but it's about the integration of the parts of yourself, the parts of your character to the world, with sexuality being included in that process. And I dissect this using two areas, macro and micro. And we're going to talk about those two things right now. So if you're novel writing, I want you to think about your novel is macro. And I want you to think about your scenes as micro. So we can pull back far to see what we're looking at, and then we can go in close to look at things. So macro and micro. But it's also a place, a lens where you can change your direction about how you're working with your novel. So, for instance, we're going to look at some folks here. We have some potential characters for romance novels here on the screen. And I want you to notice that three of the pictures are located outdoors. So that's the macro. And the micro is the couple where they are. Three pictures are indoors. So the smaller, we've now moved from outside to inside, but the inside, that room is macro and the couple is micro. So every time you move, You change what the macro lens is, and you change what the micro lens is. And those are important elements for you to pay attention to related to sexuality. In this, looking at these pictures, one of the things that I want you to recognize is that sexuality is a construct. It is put together, it's made up. This isn't something that everybody knows about. It's what you've learned as you've grown up, the different things, the meanings, and that sort of thing. But when I talk about sexuality, one of the things that I do is to talk about the aspects of it. So I put it into different buckets. So you might have fantasy, gender, desire, sexual orientation, pleasure, intimacy, affection, self-love, sensuality, body image, sexual behaviors. So those are all buckets that we can talk about for where our characters are. The second part that I look at is love languages. So when we're talking about in romance, how we're moving back and forth with our love interest in the process, what are the languages? How do the characters express love? Are they words of affirmation, acts of service, receiving gifts, having quality time, or physical touch? So that's another arena that you can take a look at characters and see how they express sexuality. And the third one that I use is aspects of erotic templates. And this is probably something that most people don't get any information about at all. And this is how you're wired sexually. So first is energetic. So if you are wired energetically, you're someone who's turned on by anticipation and by space and by yearning, teasing, longing.
I'm just letting you know, crew will be out there to mow today. Thank you.
Oops. The second thing is sensual. So you could have an erotic template that is sensual, and you're turned on by all of your senses being ignited. And the third one is kinky. And kinky is someone who's turned on by the notion of taboo. And I always put a disclaimer there because I really don't like to talk about things in taboo, because my work has been about normalizing sexuality and taking a look at what fits for you and what fits for your partner and where all of that comes together. And the last one is shapeshifter, and that includes all of the templates together. So you're turned on by sensual, you're turned on by sexual, you're turned on by kinky, and you're turned on by energetic. When we look at people, ourselves, characters, the sexual history, our sexual history resides in our body, and it comes out overtly or covertly. So you might look at pictures like this and start thinking about, what can I learn about the character based on the information that I'm visually seeing with them right now? And where do characters express those aspects of sexuality in your stories? So when I sit in the broad macro direction, I can start thinking about picking and choosing what of sexuality I want to highlight or bring forward into the story that is important to the characters. And how can you, the author, allow the character to give us more experience of their sexuality as a particular lens in the romance novel that you're writing? So one of the things that occurred for me in the process of my writing, which started 10 years ago, and like all good authors, education, 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 I took a 2-year novel writing class. And this was with Heather Whitaker, and she's got many best-selling authors out there, and one of them just had a movie made. So she's an interesting person to work with for this one big reason. She is a physicist by schooling. So when she looks at writing the novel, the overarching thing, she sees a catalyst, a complication, a crisis, a climax, and a consequence across the novel. Well, just like in physics, everything is made up of the same thing. We now drop to the scene level, and in the scene level, we'll have a catalyst, a complication, a crisis, a climax, and a consequence. So we're building these small building blocks that, when put together, create the overarching novel. And it was interesting because when I first started writing and she was doing work with me, I was doing a lot of short stories. And she realized in that moment that if you can write short stories, because it has all five of the things that you have to have in a novel, you will easily write a novel because then you get to have much more exposition and much more narrative mode in your writing. So it makes it kind of fun to think about each of these little things are replicating what it is that I'm doing so I can strengthen the work that I'm doing with all of these things together. So when I'm looking at this and she was watching me write, I would actually take my scene and I would read it and I would mark all five of these things in the scene. Where did this happen? And we're going to do that with rein her in. But for me, I was looking for the sexuality part. I was looking for how one does sexuality. So overtly, how are you as a sexual person bringing that out into the world? Inside you, what are you thinking about? What are you processing? Where are all of those things about how you do sexuality in your process? And I think that one of the things that's important to me is to continue being an educator and helping people understand where sexuality sits. And if you haven't seen my book, I'm a textbook person. I made my own textbook. So here's my textbook. And I wanted to read to you the basis for where I look at sexuality so you can start seeing how that fits in your thinking. And I use the basic definition of the World Health Organization. A central aspect of being human throughout life encompasses sex, gender identities and roles, sexual orientation, eroticism, pleasure, intimacy, and reproduction. Sexuality is experienced and expressed in thoughts, fantasies, desires, beliefs, attitudes, values, behaviors, practices, roles, and relationships. Sexuality is influenced by the interaction of biological, psychological, social, economic, cultural, legal, historical, religious, and spiritual factors. So when we take a look at sexuality, there's a lot more to it than just saying, oh, shall I put sex in my novel? There's so much that you can uncover, so much that you can use. And for me, sexuality creates the process. So when I start a story, I'm one of those people who are already thinking, what is the sexuality going to do in my story? What am I showcasing about my two characters or three characters or four characters, whatever that is? And if you start thinking that sexuality is more than just we have a scene where someone is going to be physically intimate, if you think it's more than that, you're beginning your story like you're doing a weaving, and you anchor your threads in the first chapter, and the thread of sexuality goes through the entire novel. And then you can start to manipulate where you're going to drop in information from all of these different areas that fit for the story that you're telling and the characters that are in your particular story. The important part is that characters, you have to understand why the character chooses to have sex. You have to understand why the character brings it forward the way that they do. And when I'm gathering sexuality pieces, I put them in buckets. So that's the macro. Here are the buckets. Now I'm going to get specific pieces of information about my character, and they go in that bucket. And the meaning of what's going on in the sexuality comes through in those particular behaviors. So the surprise is that sexuality secrets inside you may be fueling what your writing is. Maybe you saw something, maybe you heard something, maybe you had an experience. Those things help to fuel your writing. And I want you to know one of the funniest things that happened in the process of writing the Fiction Writer's Sexuality Guide is that I gave it to a fellow sex therapist. And she read it and called me on the phone and she said, you are so sneaky. Writers will never know what hit them. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, you've created a writing sex therapy program and people don't know it. So if you use my book and you use the information in it, you're actually doing work with yourself in order to be clear about where you, the author, stop and start and where you, your characters, begin. So that makes it kind of interesting. So we'll move from the story structure here, the 5 C's, and we're going to talk about sexuality scene construction, the way that I put it together. Okay, so here is the picture that goes with this story, Rein Her In. And I want you to know that this is the 5th story I ever wrote. So I always pull something from the history to bring it forward and take a look at it, because I love to see how much my writing has changed or progressed, because it's always an evolution. And the reason that I did this way, this story was created from this picture. And there is an editor, her name is Anna Richards, and she works for Frolic Me magazine. It's a platform for women for erotic fantasies, erotic writing. And she was all about how can we get women exactly what they need. As humans, we take in information. As a teacher, I know this, as some of you are teachers, we have different representational systems. Are you a visual person? Are you a kinesthetic person? Are you an auditory person? Which representation system leads you for the way you take in your world? So one of the interesting things, and I'm going to go ahead and drop it right here to give you an example of why this is important. If you were in a relationship and say one partner is visual, and so that visual person sees clothes laying all over the floor, they have a feeling about that. Okay. Now, suppose you're a kinesthetic person. That means, your body reacts to stuff. Suppose you get into your nice clean sheets to find out that your partner had been there first with crackers and cheese. Okay. If you just had a sensation, you're experiencing the kinesthetic. If you had a sensation with the visual, you're experiencing the visual. As writers, we need to think about all of the representational systems that we can use to give the fullest experience to the reader. And so looking at something like this, what I do in the process is I looked at this particular picture and I wondered what would happen if someone walked into this scene. Who would that somebody be? What would happen? Why was this important? What's the backstory? And that's how Rein Her In came to be. So it's basic journalism. That is absolute basic. Who, what, when, where, how. So we're doing that. And thinking about what happened before and what's going to happen after this scene or this story is done. The fact that this woman is pleasuring herself can be seen as a moment. It can be seen as a plan. It can be seen as a journey, but it sets the stage for where the character is right this minute. So I use that as a data point. So here we are in time at this moment, and we're going to move in different directions with this information. You can look at this picture and you can think, it informs attitudes and beliefs and values and ethics and class and education and culture, motivation, desire, mental state, all of that we can see in a picture like this. How do you take that and now create it into the story that you want to be telling? In the Fiction Writer's Guide, there's a character planning sexuality worksheet, so you can use this information and actually jot it down so you have it there for you. Whenever I do this, unlike all of you, I'm always saying, I want to know about the sexuality first. Most people do that last. I want to know about it first, because you want to see how we're going to bring it to life in their particular world. So this gives us an interesting notion of the idea of the journey of sexuality. Where is the journey of it in your particular story? Is it in the forefront of the story? Is it in the background of your story? Where is it, and how are you going to pull those threads and that weaving to bring it forward? Okay, so here's a scene construction, and I'm going to stop the slideshow for this moment and ask you Tell me what you're seeing.
Uh, Opening, character, plot, setting, dialogue, pacing, description, voice,
Okay,
and
you're still seeing that. Okay. Can you see me as well?
I can, yes. Well,
Okay.
I
So,
might not be seeing it the way other people. Somebody want to put in the chat, can you see both the slide and Dr. Jennings? Yes. Okay, yes.
okay, what I want to do now is stop and everybody can take their microphones off. And I'm actually interested in, after reading the story, what some of the things are that you marked on this construction checklist.
Okay, Deborah doesn't see the slide. I don't know why you don't see the slide. Everybody else is seeing the slide. Um, I I don't know. So I'm not sure what it is you were asking, Doctor.
Okay, there's a checklist right there.
Yeah.
I hoped everyone had read the story and they actually used the checklist. And now I'm interested in what you did with the checklist in
Well,
relation to the story.
I'm going to apologize because I've been on vacation this week. I haven't
Ah,
read the story. My apologies.
is there anybody who's read the story?
Didn't know there was a story to read.
Okay. If nobody has read this story, it's probably because I've been on vacation and haven't been looking at my emails, and I did not ask my assistant to double check things. My apologies, Dr. Jennings. So we can comment though about what we think the story might have been from the picture.
That's okay. I can work it from a different direction. I was just hoping that everybody with the handout that I sent you had been able to read ahead of time, so it would be even more rich in terms of what they're going to get. But for this particular story, um, the way the beginning of the story unfolds is that it's an opening of intrigue rather than one of explanation. And I do that a lot. And I think that comes from having done therapy so much. You walk in the door, you sit down, and you don't know what's going to happen next. And so a lot of that is Dr. J, the author person, coming right into the story. And so you're looking for Colin, in the sense of wants and needs. Colin wants to understand and he wants to connect, and Sonia wants to return safely. What I think I'm going to do, since folks have not read the story, is to talk a little bit about why you would use a checklist like this to go through your specific story and identify the items that you, let's see, current slide. Okay. Can everybody see slide now?
Well, actually, when you had it before, I could see it much larger. On this view, I see the next slide in addition to the slide that you have.
Okay. Let me go back here. Okay, so you can see only one slide now.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Can I make a
Oh,
suggestion here? If
sure.
you if you go to the top right, about an inch from the top right, there's a little caret. If you toggle that, it will close up that banner and the slide will be larger. No, just toggle the little
Yeah.
button that,
Yeah, the one that shows this ribbon from the
yeah.
beginning, the current slide, if you toggle that to caret, it will,
But you should be, I mean, I'm playing the
yeah,
whole thing, so I
yeah,
might not
no,
be in
that's,
the right. Hang on a second. Let me stop share.
yeah.
I might not be in the right. Can't see. I have three screens up, so I just might
No,
not be.
you're on the right screen. The difference is when you are in the PowerPoint, you can reduce that ribbon that shows previous slide, current slides,
But you shouldn't be seeing that at all. Your entire screen should be the slide.
well, it isn't. But anyway,
It,
if you
it
want to
isn't.
continue,
Okay, let me try this again. How about now?
not seeing anything at this point.
Well, this is just lovely. I don't usually have this kind of problem with the thing.
Well, when you hit the screen share, you have to pick which screen you're
I
sharing.
know,
Okay.
that's what I was doing. As I said, I have three to choose from, so I'm working to get the right one. Okay, what do you see now?
Okay, now we see that screen.
Okay, let's see from current slide. Now do you see the whole screen?
No. Now I see two screens. I mean, two slides, this current slide and the next slide. Now we see the current slide.
Okay, I'm gonna leave it alone. I'm just not gonna mess with anything right now. Okay, so you may not, if you haven't read the story, some of this is going to be a little disjointed because I have taken the story that you have the handout for, and I have shown you how to use a macro direction line by line to look at any scene that you're working with. So so the story is 3 pages long. And in this color-coded highlighting, you have dialogue, action, narrative, and exposition. This is used as a tool from a distance, so it's a macro item. You take each line, and typically when I'm doing one of these, I'll start with dialogue, mark it first, then I'll mark action second, and then I'll do narrative and exposition. And the point of this is to make this as small as you can and look for chunks of color. So you're looking at what you're leaning toward in terms of the writing. So if you had an entire page that was all yellow, that would be all narrative. Where's the breakup for the reader in that direction? Where is some of the exposition, or where is some of the action, or where is some of the dialogue? This is about your pacing, and so you can use this in the macro direction as a tool to see what your scene is looking like. Now, when you do this, you move it from macro to micro, which is the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, the micro part of the holistic sexuality. And when I do that, I do the same highlighting, but I use the words physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, pick the colors, and then I start and mark the scene to see how much of the scene is physical movement, how much of the scene is emotional movement, how much of the scene is mental, and how much of the scene is spiritual. And one of the things that this does is to help you get a notion of where sexuality can move easily in the work that you're doing. And it gives balance to the reader. So when we're talking about physical, we're looking for physical bodies, touch, arousal, sensory detail. When we're looking at emotional, desire, vulnerability, conflict, care. When we're looking at mental, what are the inner thoughts? Is there any hesitation? What kind of planning things might be going on? And then spiritual ties us into meaning, connection, intention, and transformation. And those are all elements that work well with sexuality, but we haven't been taught about how to think about it that way, or necessarily how to look at it that particular way. When I was taking Heather's novel writing class, I also took a class with Angela James, who was a Harlequin editor. And she now has a book out called Edit Your Way. If you've not seen it, you really ought to grab it, because it's really cool in terms of the way she puts things together. Her course was called Before You Hit Send. And one of the things that I appreciated that she did in talking about sexuality is that so many people get nervous about writing body parts, and how am I going to deal with any number of different things if I'm uncomfortable or unfamiliar or whatever. She put it in a very concise direction to say that if we always stay in the place that the character has agency, okay, we want to show what we're working on. We want to show, not tell, but the agency goes with the person. So here are two examples, concrete, that I wanted to share with you so you would get an understanding of what that has to do with. The sentence, her legs thrashed on the sheet. So the legs are running the show. She thrashed against the sheets, her legs kicking with frenzied energy. The second example, my nose nuzzled her ear and my breath eased out. Instead, I nuzzled her ear with my nose and exhaled slowly beside her. Agency goes with the person instead of the body part running the show. So that was one little detail about body parts that I always like to share with people in that direction. So from the story, and especially if you haven't seen it, this will make more sense to see the 5 C's listed out this way. The catalyst of this story is that Sonia gets lost in her creative process. Her husband, Colin, comes to take the reins and bring her home, back into where she is. The complication is that he's never entered her creative space for writing, her sexual creative space, and he doesn't know how to help. And though the crisis is he has to invent a way to guide her back into the realm that they're in right now without breaking her imaginative state. And then he tells her when she has her orgasm, it's his orgasm, not in the creative place she is, but right there in their room where they are. And that leads her back to reality, and and they succeed. And then the consequence is they've now created a shared creative process that has changed their relationship. When I first used this model, everybody would say, but climax is the orgasm. And I said, no, just because climax and orgasm can mean the same thing does not mean that that's what it means in this system. Climax is the scene specific. The orgasm is going to be the physical manifestation of the emotional climax. So it's important for you to think about how you're layering information in. So the catalyst is she asks for help. The complication is he doesn't know how. The crisis is he must trust himself, that he becomes the person capable of bringing her home in the climax, and the consequences, they're now a team creative together. And in this particular story, when you put that beside rein her in teaching PIMS, you look at the physical, she's physically aroused, she gets physically disoriented, and then he physically grounds her. And then you're looking at the trust component in their emotional world. He accepts responsibility, and their trust can deepen in that process. And so the entire scene is a mental construct. It's imagination, it's books, it's characters, it's immersion. And then the spiritual part is bringing her home, and that we have made this new area together. And when you work with those particular things, what you recognize is that the 5C structure and PIMS are not separate models or frameworks. They actually interlock. The 5Cs describe the structural movement of the scene, and the PIMS describes what's changing within the people as the structure unfolds. So in Rein Her In, the 5Cs, how the scene moves, and then the PIMS tells us what the movement transforms. So hopefully you'll see that this is a structural spine. The 5Cs are a structural spine, and PIMS is the emotional anatomy that ensures sexual interaction, advances the story, the relationship, and the characters simultaneously. So we're going to take a look at story and character and sexual and emotional arc. And so this is more about authors understanding how they track the growth in a story through the thread of sexuality with the characters. So if you think about it, you're grounding the reader from the beginning that you're going to have sexuality in the story. And if you think about it as first anything, first kiss, first blowjob, first intercourse, first anal training. It doesn't matter what it is. you're going to think about all the steps that are going to occur if this is going to be an element of the story that you're putting in. Or if it's going to be an emotional component, you're doing those steps in the same kind of way. You're breaking things down into smaller areas so that you can see where the history of the character is and how you can bring that forward and use it as a conflict item within your story. And the several worksheets in Fiction Writer's Guide have a place to talk about historical information so that you can fit those things together. One of the things that I really want you to understand is that in the editing that I've helped authors with who have not worked with sexuality, romance writers tend to use sex scenes. And I'm saying that specifically because I use the framing scenes with sex. So sex scenes are something that you would reach onto a shelf and say, this is where I would put it right here to confirm the relationship. Okay. My work has been about building the character through their sexuality and through their vulnerability and allowing the readers to have that experience as it's going on in the story. So let's look at it from this direction. In this story, it is 5 C's. We've talked about what they are. We know the outline of what happened in those 5 scenes, but we also now know that it's a building block for the bigger novel. So if I wanted to take this short story and write a novel, then where I would be stopping now is going, is this scene one that's in the beginning or in the middle or in the end? Okay. So if the scene that you read, Rein Her In, is at the beginning, then you get to decide from that moment, what is the journey of sexuality that's going to take? What is the relationship journey that's going to happen? If you decide that this scene fits in the middle, then you get to pause and say, what kinds of things would have to happen to get us to this scene? And then after that scene, what kinds of things are going to happen? If you said that this is the end of the story, then you get to create the full journey of how they ended up in that particular space. That's the beauty of thinking about it in blocks. And it's also the creative part to understand that this is a complete writing in and of itself. And sometimes we may not think about that in that way. So if we move on to the relationship, I think of it as a journey as well. And you're looking at the placement that you have about that. And many romance writers use the GMC to talk about that. So you have, oops, went too far, goals, conflict, and motivation. And I put desires in here because I always like to talk about desires when we're doing sexuality work. But one of the things that I always caution people about, especially if they have not really focused on sexuality, is that you automatically consider trauma as the conflict of a story. But there are so many things that you can do within sexuality to create those particular conflicts. So it could be mismatched personality types, the ones that we talked about earlier. It could be different places on the individual sexuality journey. Somebody's further ahead in their learning than somebody else is. It could be actual different types of sexual experiences that could cause the conflict. We could have the example that I gave of the clothes on the floor and the crackers in the bed. That's a mismatch. What if those two people live together? What's sexuality going to look like for them? Who's going to be cleaning up and who's going to be doing what to keep everything organized? So you have different ways to take a look at conflict elements, different love language, different sexual erotic blueprints, different attitudes, beliefs. All of those things can come into play to pull out elements of the sexuality that speak to the character. And it's pretty fluid. That's what's pretty fun about thinking about sexuality and pulling different things together. Sex is not the reward at the end of character development. It's one of the primary ways character development can happen. And as I said, that's, very different in romance writing, because my work is about building scenes with sex for the character to grow. And each scene is going to teach the character something about themselves or each other or the kind of life that they are creating together. And one of the things that's pretty interesting is how I look at sex for all the different things that it can provide for us as individuals and for us as the characters. Scenes with sex answer different emotional questions. And if you think about how your character is going to have their journey, what kinds of things are they going to have problems with? And how can you position sexuality to highlight those problems for them to go through it and come out the other side? And I like to look at desire becoming a characterization because the sexuality reveals who characters are psychologically. And that's an interesting way to posture your notion about sexuality. How are you put together and how does your sexuality come out the way it does? It can become another language for trust. Erotic scenes can move the relationship, so something has to be different at the end. And if you're tying it to a piece of history, a difference in mismatch, any of these things, you're going to be able to use the sexuality to make those changes happen. Humor has to be in sexuality. If you're not having humor in there, then something's not going the way it ought to be going, because believe me, in terms of how bodies look and move and whatever, if you can't giggle about what's going on, you're missing the fun in the whole process. So putting that into the writing is a good thing too. Intimacy is a co-creation item rather than performance. Sex can become collaborative storytelling. And in most of my stories, that's exactly how they formulate and what they look like. And I saved the last one as my favorite because setting participates in sex and it can change what sex means. I live in the Great Smoky Mountains. And I go outside every single day, and there are things that happen outside that must touch my skin, filter in my mind, the vortex or whatever that people say is here, the spirituality component. Any one of those elements in PIMS could come into play, and I could have a story idea come in. And it might be standing in the middle of the forest. It might be going down a hiking trail and 9 men passed by me and I'm with my friend and we're all going, these are really hot men. And the next thing I know, I have a whole story about 9 hot men on a hiking trail. It's using setting that's going to highlight something, cause a conflict, cause it to be an interesting thing, exhibitionism, voyeurism, any elements about sexuality, the setting can come into play. The bedroom is like the least interesting place to have a sexual encounter. There are so many wide places that you could think of that would highlight the journey that the characters are going on and make it be interesting and fun and different and exciting. And that's what I think about in the sexuality world. So if I pull all this together for you, the 2 main things that I want you to think about is that the 5 C's structure and PIMS go together. They're interlocked. So you have your spine for how to write, and then you have the emotional anatomy for how everything is going to unfold. And for my teaching takeaway, instead of asking, how can these characters have sex? So you're trying to figure out where they're going to do it, where we're going to be, and all of these different things. Ask, who will they become because they had sex together? Those are different questions and a different focal point. I was extremely fortunate to be able to spend time with David Morrell. I found out that he was going to be speaking at the Florida Writers Conference one year, and he was a proponent at that time of being on Twitter and talking about all his work. And so I sent him a tweet and I said, I'm hoping to meet you and I'm really excited. And then he followed me and we started having conversations on Twitter before we met down in Orlando. And one of the things that struck me about the way he talked about characters, he said that a character's job tells you how they work, how they problem solve, how they figure everything out, how they process information. And when I thought about that, he said that's the first thing when he's writing a story. I have to know what the job the character has. For me, I have to understand the character's sexuality because that tells you how the character lives. So it's a different vantage point, but it's a fun way to think about sexuality. And lastly, I wanted to tell you a little bit about this because I don't know how many of you work in webs or networks in your writing, how many of your worlds cross over. I was actually here before I moved to the Smoky Mountains when I created on the screen the cards there. And this is Purple Passion cards for women. And I had just signed a contract to write a sexuality journal for women with a co-author, and her husband died. And we had to revamp and how we're going to do that. So what I did was I came up here to think, what am I going to do without her? How am I going to put this together? And I created this card deck, which became an integral part of finishing the journal. Well, after I did all of that, I thought, well, how interesting. I should write a fictional story about a sex educator and an interesting character as a romance story for the fictional story of how I created the cards. So I have this woman in Jacksonville. She's a sex educator. I have this whole story. And then having lived in Fernandina Beach, Amelia Island for 10 years, I've been studying the history there, bordellos. I got all sorts of interesting information there. I have a massage therapist in Destination Bordello, which will be out in October, who finds out that she has this house and didn't know she had any of these relatives. And the madam was her ancestor. And the house has back taxes. And now she has to come up with a plan in order to clear the taxes to get the house. And she creates a destination, bordello, where you can call up and make a reservation for the fantasy that you'd like to have put together in this particular room. So it's a bed and breakfast without the breakfast. So, and Confessions of the Bordello is from the house's point of view as a lead magnet for this particular story. So those are the things that I wanted to share for you. I'm going to get off share here, and we'll use the rest of the time here for any questions.
Well, thank you so much. That was very informative. And we do have a few questions here. Now, just to let everybody know, since I was very delinquent by taking my first vacation in 5 years and not sending out the story, I will attach the story to the replay. The replay will be up by the weekend. And for the people who had a little bit of trouble seeing things, I have recorded this so that you will see the slide with Dr. Jennings next to the slide. You won't be seeing all the people. So that should help a lot. So let me go up here at the beginning and see what we have.
Wow, 42 things in my chat.
Yeah. So, okay, some of this had to do with how could people see
Yeah.
the things the way they wanted to. So, okay, that wasn't it. Let me see. I'll send out a replay with the, okay. Let's see. Okay, so I had a couple people who said that they were Christian writers and they're looking at sexuality as it is implied in the story without the bedroom scenes. Can you talk a little bit about that for the people who are doing Sweet and Clean?
Yes. The interesting thing is that even if you choose not to show explicit sexuality scenes, your characters still think about sexuality, have feelings about sexuality, tie that together to their religious beliefs. Those things can come through in the story. The idea here is with holistic sexuality, you're bringing the whole character for us to see. They can consider, wonder, what is this going to be like when I get behind the door? But you don't have to show any of those kinds of things. But you do have to understand how the character is putting together sexuality for when they do go behind the door.
Okay. If anybody wants a clarification on that, put it in the chat. If you have any questions, put it in the chat. One person asked, and this had to do with your story, what did you mean by Colin Grounds her?
Oh, grounding. I'm physically grounded into a place. So when we're writing a story, you want the reader to have a sense of where they are. So they are grounded in the scene. So that's a kinesthetic. That's a kinesthetic thing. So when you're giving enough description, but not overloaded with description, that your person is actually coming into the scene. I'm sitting right here. He is right here. He is pulling her back into present, away from her inventive, imaginative, everything. Like you're out here in the ether doing your thing, and I'm pulling you back down here on the bed. We're going to have this conversation. I'm grounding you back into our world.
Okay, that's understandable. So somebody is asking, is there a checklist? Is that going to be in the things that you send to me? Okay,
Yes.
checklist will
But
be there.
the story, the checklist, and the two highlighted macro and micro. Those are
Okay.
in the handout.
And then also the question, do you see any difference between young adult and adult fiction as it refers to sexuality?
I'm not sure that I would say yes or no in that direction, because my experience is that if you're in the United States, you have not had comprehensive sexuality education. And so, whatever your upbringing direction about that is, filters through whether you know that or not. And so the question may be more technical in terms of in YA, what is the quote, quote, appropriate sexuality, which I don't know. I don't do YA. I really don't spend much time there. But any human in the United States related to their comprehensive sexuality education, if they haven't had it, they're only going on experience or something that they've heard. They're not providing the information in a way that fits the world that people live in. And that's going to be the same whether someone is writing YA or whether someone is writing adult fiction. And believe me, after teaching college forever, to hear students tell me, yes, that book was my Bible for how to do X, Y, and Z in sexuality. And then I read what they said, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this poor author didn't even know what they were talking about. These things don't fit together. I'll give you an example. We now know that the G spot probably is not a G spot. Okay. And the reason for that is because we have the clitoral body with legs. Are we familiar with this, or do you want to see? Hang on, let me stand up and grab my model. Of all of the research that's done, women's sexuality has the least amount of research done. So this was done by an Australian urologist. This is what the clitoral body looks like inside the female. So what you see on the outside in the vulva, the tip here is the clitoris. Then you have the hood over this, and everything else is tucked behind the vulva inside. So if you have been a person who would sit on a motorcycle and feel vibrations, or if you sat on a washing machine and felt vibrations, and I'm not talking about necessarily directly to the tip of the clitoris, I'm just talking about in general, all of this part is the clitoris. So instead of saying the G spot, somebody could insert their fingers into the vagina and they may be pressing this area, or they may be pressing this area. It's a movement fluid body. So for women to say, I'm going to write this story, I'm going to say, we're finding the G spot this way. History, no longer accurate. This is the new accurate world. And so that's what happens when I read manuscripts for authors to say, okay, let's jump in here and take a look at where today we can talk about sexuality and the things that we can know, so that you're not putting inaccurate information or misinformation within your stories and the way that you're writing sexuality.
I find that very interesting. I know a woman, although she doesn't consider herself, I don't think, a sex teacher per se, but in a lot of ways, she talks about sexuality in her work with people. And I kind of found it funny. She was almost like sexuality. You have a G spot, you have an A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And she would talk about different places inside that she might call it a G spot or a B spot or a spot as of where it is located and the kind of climax it can give you. So I thought that was very
Well, I
interesting.
mean, and when we now look at this is the anatomical structure that we're dealing with, it's going to be varied from person to person to person, which is why the communication component, another conflict that you could put in your story. Well, the woman I was with before liked it this way. Well, I don't get anything by what you're doing. So this is not how my body works. So it's that ownership of being able to be clear about this is how this works for me. And even research studies like the length of the urethra can determine orgasm easily or more difficult. So there are things that we know, but the general public doesn't get that information, which means authors are probably not going to get that information too. So it makes it kind of
We
interesting.
have another comment. Aside from your own novels, do you have writers who work you recommend who write sex well and who are good at doing it?
Yes. Gee, I don't know why I didn't think about that question in the process. Um, I have a group of writers, and they are not going to be the New York Times, whatever. Misha Elliott and Oleander Plume are some of the best writers that I have seen doing scenes with sex. And I actually like uh, Laura Kay in some of her older work. I like the way she writes, and you can tell she has a PhD in history. So she's one of those people. I think anybody who's been to school forever always goes to do research. I need to research. I need to make sure I'm accurate. I need to make sure this kind of stuff is going on. I think Heated Rivalry did a really fine job in the scenes with sex direction, up close and personal and far away. I mean, I was listening to a screenwriter talk about the telephone conversation, having the two people on screen back to back and listening to that. So yeah, those are the ones that just come top of my mind. I'm gonna have to go make a list now.
Okay, and then also you said that you do have a book for authors, and if you give me that title, I will put it in the chat. The fiction, oops, let's see if I can write. If the fiction writers sexuality guide. Okay.
Yeah, sex, it's more than a scene.
All right. Any other questions before we say thank you very much? Going once, going twice.
I,
Thank
I
you.
have I have
Okay.
one thing. If since you didn't get to read the story, and have that be part of the conversation, feel free to email me if you have any questions at all about that. And I'm gonna put a different email in here, Judith. And I found out what the issue was with my.
Yes, and I really am so. I have not had a vacation in years, and my brother and I just played tourist the last few days. So I was incognito when it came to paying attention to
There you
anything.
go.
Okay, Dr. Donna Jennings at gmail.com. Yay for vacation. I agree. So thank you so much. And you're in the Smoky Mountains. That is a beautiful area. I moved recently to central Kentucky, so we're almost neighbors.
Yes,
Thank,
we are.
all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.